So, welcome back to the channel. There are at least 1 million videos on YouTube and at least 7 million books in your local bookstore about how to prune fruit trees, when to do it, how to do it. And to be honest, if you're going to write a whole half-hour video or you're going to sell a book, you're going to have to make it sound complicated. The truth is, pruning isn't particularly complicated. There's a couple of things that you're probably best off knowing, when to do it and how to do it, but beyond that it's very much more an art than a science. So let's quickly talk about the technical, but this is absolutely not a video on how to prune trees. You're not going to watch this and learn excellent technique. In fact, from time to time I will almost certainly be using terrible technique, but that's okay. None of my trees have died through pruning yet. So you want to prune twice a year really for your young fruit trees, and there's only really two reasons to prune your trees, and they're both basically about making more fruit. I prune for aesthetics more than anything else. I want my trees sort of round and compact, and you can definitely see on this apple tree here, I think it's probably the James Grieve, but I'm not completely sure. You can see that I didn't prune it last summer. I might not have pruned it last winter either, and it's getting a bit leggy. There's a whole load of sticky outy bits, and maybe not on this tree, but certainly on some of the others that we look at. You'll notice that I'm pruning stuff that's already bearing fruit. I have no doubt at all that the books will tell you that that's a terrible idea, but I don't know, like I say, I haven't killed any of my trees yet. So the summer pruning, mostly you're wanting to take off excessive growth. You don't really want your trees to grow too quickly. You want them to build nice strong root structures and have nice thick stems that anchor them into the ground. You don't particularly want huge leggy trees, and if you just let them grow without doing anything about them at all, sure, they'll grow plenty of apples and pears and whatever other fruits you've got going. Here's one, look at this, I'm taking off a huge bit there. They'll definitely still grow all the fruits that you want. So pruning fruit trees in the summer is really all about shape. And pruning in the winter you might do a little bit harder, which is then about the health of the tree more than anything else. So what we're doing here is you're going to see me walking around the trees a lot, and just looking to see where they're even and where they're uneven. I mean, you can certainly argue that having them even is just an aesthetic thing, but you can also say it's going to make it stronger in tough winds. It's going to be way less likely to get uprooted and blown over in a strong breeze if the wind is acting on it fairly equally in all directions. But mostly the tree will invest as much energy as it can into the strongest, hardest, best growing branches, and that's not necessarily what we want. Fruits don't grow evenly on every part of the tree, and if you want to know more about it, where the fruits grow, then that would be a good time to get a book on fruit trees, with fruit tree pruning as well. But basically they grow on what's called a fruiting spur. So the apples, they never grow very far away from one of the bigger branches, and usually just on a little branchlet just off the main branch. So cutting back the excessive growth, we'll see this very much on a bit of a close-up later where I'm doing a pear tree. The pear tree's made absolutely tons of fresh young growth, which is all twigs and leaves, and none of that's ever going to grow apples, not this year and not next year either. So we cut all the new growth back to a third, is the thing they'll tell you in the books. But yeah, mostly we just want to make it pretty, really, for all the good reasons as well as the not so good ones. certainly if you look at the trees we've got here, some of them look really good and round and healthy, and some of them less so. And I know exactly why this is. It's because the first time I did a winter pruning, it was really cold. It was about -15 outside, snow everywhere, and my hands started to freeze. And I did about half the trees in, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, and for some reason didn't go and finish them. Just some sort of deep psychological fear of being too damn cold. It's not necessarily a psychological fear, it might just be an actual fear of being too damn cold. So again, we're just going to walk around the tree, round and round, trying to find the whole 3-dimensional thing. I had a friend for a long time in London, and he was a tailor, and we were talking about tailoring once, and he said it's got nothing to do with plans and cutting and sewing, and it's about being able to see a 3-dimensional piece of clothing on a 2-dimensional piece of material. And I totally got that. It makes so much complete sense. But I am not a tailor, and I've never made a single item of clothing. But it's the same with pruning fruit trees. You want to be able to see it in 3 dimensions. Selection of where you actually cut it, where you actually cut the tree, the branch, is fairly important, well, very important really, and how you do it. Again, there's plenty of videos and guides online, and you only really need to know one thing, and that's the angle at which you need to cut and the closeness to a bud. So I've been doing this quite a few years, and sometimes you'll see me just go cut quite quickly, especially with the leggier trees, the ones that have made a lot more summer growth or spring growth, because it's really easy to see where those buds are. And the actual cut you do, the slightly angled, like 45-degree angle, with the top of the cut closest to the bud and the bottom of the cut on the opposite side of the branch. And like I say, go and have a look on the internet. You do not need to spend tons of money on courses, or ask professionals to come around and show you. You've got to be a bit brave. And you've got to not mind if you get it a bit wrong. If you're being a little cautious and not cutting maybe as hard as you should be, you're absolutely not going to kill the tree. You can always cut it a bit more next year as you get a bit more experience. If you cut it too much, it might worry you the next year. I have a cherry, not in this bit of the orchard, down by the soft fruits, and I don't think it had ever been pruned. It was planted at least by the people who were here before me. The tree's a good 10 years old now, and probably older, and it had never made a single cherry in the whole time I've been here, which is kind of alright. I'm not that into cherries, but they're a nice little bit of something different a couple of times a year. But the tree was really leggy, really hadn't been cared for at all, and yeah, it wasn't producing any fruit at all. So last year, I cut it back. Last year in the winter, and if you're going to cut something hard, then cut it in the winter, not in the summer. Last year in the winter, I cut it back really hard. Like I took about 80% of the growth off it, turned it into a stump, almost pollarded it. I don't know, I've never seen a pollarded cherry tree. I don't suppose it's a very clever thing to do, but I cut it all the way back, and I think I've got 5 or 6 cherry trees. I'll probably do a quick count up, but it's somewhere around 5 or 6. And this one started to put leaves on this year way later than the rest, and I was convinced I'd killed it. But we had a very wet April here, so it got plenty of water, and it did indeed put leaves on, and it's looking really super healthy. I might chuck it on Instagram at some point, but it's looking really good now. But I did worry myself a lot, so I'd cut it back far too hard and killed the poor thing. But if they've got a fairly decent root structure, you can cut them real hard. I've got a neighbour who's 96 years old. Well, he's 95. His birthday's in 2 weeks. He's going to be 96. He's got a massive apple tree in his back garden. And he asked me to come and prune it a couple of years ago. And to be honest, I'm not that experienced with pruning much older trees. If you're pruning older trees, then what you want to do is essentially make them more climbable. So you're going to have to climb it anyway. There's not really much point sticking a ladder up the side, but you want to see it from the middle, from the inside. And mostly what you're doing is you're going to take out branches that are obstructing other branches. With an old tree, air stagnating in it, if air can't flow from one side to the other, and you get some sort of injury in the tree, which can happen in a million different ways, then that's how funguses get in. And killing an old fruit tree with a fungus is a fairly common way for them to go, especially if you have a particularly hot, particularly wet summer, which we do get around here from time to time. Not this year by the looks of things. This year it looks like it's just going to be hot. Thank you, El Nino, and the fossil fuel industry, of course. But the process of pruning his tree was basically to take a bloody great big saw up it and just saw through 6, 7, 8 centimetre wide branches. And they were all perfectly healthy, they were just in the wrong places. People will very often get upset with you for pruning trees, but you're making them healthier and stronger. People sometimes get very upset with you for removing trees, but as long as you're planting a lot of trees and taking care of them, if you've got a tree that's in the wrong place, shift it. And it's difficult to shift trees, so chop it down and plant one way you do want it. But trees are just crops. There's nothing wrong with treating them like that. I mean, I absolutely love trees. On the barracks I've probably planted over 1,000 so far. I do know that one year I ordered 650 and planted all of them. So maybe we're not quite at 1,000 yet. We're certainly well on the way. I saw an article, I'd say in a newspaper, but it probably wasn't, it was probably online somewhere, about a farmer who said how disappointed he was that he was having to cut down his orchard. And it wasn't an orchard, it really was just an intensive agricultural apple farm that just happened to have trees on it. And just as I don't think that you should be too precious about your trees, as long as you're husbanding, as long as you're treating all of your ground and all of your food producing area well, you shouldn't be too precious about the trees. But again, the absolute inverse of that was this farmer complaining about chopping down an orchard, and it wasn't an orchard, it was a commercially grown apple field. That sort of annoyed me ever so slightly. Say what things are, not what they aren't. So we're at the pear tree now. This is where I said you'd be able to see me cutting out a lot of fresh growth. You can see how green it is, how it doesn't really have any strength to it, and it's definitely not going to make pears on any of these spurs. So we just get rid of them all. There's also a couple of branches further down the trunk that aren't doing it any favours at all. They're just pointing downwards. They're probably never going to make pears either. This is a pear tree. And if they do, they'll probably just snap off with the weight. So we'll preemptively get rid of those. We'll stop the tree investing any more energy into it. And we'll chop those off. And there we go. When it's all finished, all of this wood, you can wait for it to dry out and use it as kindling for your fire if you like, but you're waiting 2 years and it's not very good. Or you can take it to the pigs. You'll have seen some of the branches, I had little apples on them already. So take those to the pigs, give them a lovely little treat. They like anything that's a bit new and a bit different. Thank you for watching. See you at the next one.